In 1944, a 30-ton Sherman tank was carried by 4 American soldiers. Alone. No crane, no truck, nothing. How? Because the tank weighed 45 kilos. It was made of rubber, and it could be inflated in 20 minutes with a bicycle pump. That was just one day of work for one of the strangest units the United States ever put into combat. A unit that never fired a shot with the intent to kill, that fooled the German army dozens of times, that saved, according to the Army's own estimates, between 15 and 30,000 American lives, and that stayed classified for more than 40 years, to the point where the soldiers themselves couldn't tell their own families what they did in the war. They were called the Ghost Army. And this is the story of how a group of artists, fashion designers, and sound engineers became the strangest secret weapon of the Second World War. Stick around until the end, because their boldest operation happened just meters from the Rhine, with German soldiers on the other side of the river, and it nearly went terribly wrong. Let's go back to 1943. The Allies were about to invade continental Europe, and there was a problem no general liked to talk about out loud. The United States didn't have enough soldiers. Sounds counterintuitive, right? The world's greatest industrial power, with factories running 24 hours a day, without enough men for the front? But that's how it was. Germany had years of head start on mobilization. The Allies needed to open multiple fronts at once: Italy, France, the Pacific, and every real division that existed needed to be exactly where it made a difference. There was no spare manpower to leave standing around just in case. But modern warfare isn't won by brute force alone. It's won by knowing where the enemy thinks you are and making him bet wrong.
That's when a handful of intelligence officers looked at the British, who had already been playing with military deception since North Africa, using fake wooden tanks to fool Rommel, and thought, what if we took this to a completely different level? What if, instead of just fooling the eye of a reconnaissance pilot, we fooled the radio, the sound, the paperwork, and even the rumors Germans heard in bars? In January 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was officially born. On paper, just another engineering unit. In practice, the first and only unit in the history of the American Army trained from start to finish to lie with the entire body of the Army. And here's the strangest detail of all. To make this kind of lie work, the Army didn't go looking for tough soldiers. It went looking for artists. And when I say artists, I'm not exaggerating. You're about to see who was in this unit, and one of their names has probably passed through your closet without you ever knowing the connection. The 23rd had around 1,100 men, and the recruitment was, without exaggeration, the strangest of the entire war. Instead of looking for sharpshooters, the Army went straight to the art and design schools of New York and Philadelphia. It recruited painters, sculptors, advertising illustrators, architects, sound engineers, and get this, future giants of American fashion.
One of the soldiers was Bill Blass, who after the war would become one of the most influential designers in the United States, dressing everyone from socialites to first ladies. Another was Ellsworth Kelly, who would become one of the central names in post-war American abstract art, with works still on display at the MoMA today. Arthur Singer was also there, who would later illustrate the bird guides that shaped how entire generations of Americans learned to identify birds. Why artists? Because their mission demanded a very specific skill, understanding how the human eye reads a scene and decides, in seconds, whether something is real or not. A painter knows exactly which shadow to place, so the viewer's brain fills in the rest. A designer knows how a logo, a serial number, a badly made insignia will instantly give away a fake to a trained eye, and therefore knows how to get it right. These men were split into 4 specialties, working like 4 instruments in an orchestra of lies. Visual deception, inflatable tanks, fake artillery, rubber trucks,
canvas planes, all designed to look right from a distance, from above, and especially to the cameras of German reconnaissance planes. Sound deception, a unit that recorded, on high-fidelity records borrowed from Bell Labs studios, the real sounds of armored divisions on the move, tank engines, trucks shifting gears, men shouting orders. Those sounds were played at high volume through trucks fitted with massive speakers, capable of simulating the noise of an entire division from 25 kilometers away. Radio deception. Operators who imitated the Morse code typing style of real units from other units, creating fake radio traffic so convincing that German intelligence, which monitored that kind of signal, believed it was listening to entire divisions on the move.
Atmospheric deception, the most theatrical part of all. Soldiers who dressed in the insignia of generals and colonels from divisions that weren't actually there, went to bars and cafes near the front, and accidentally let wrong information slip to spies and civilians who might pass it along to the Germans. In other words, they didn't just fool the eye, they fooled the ear, the radio, and even the mouth of the drunk soldier at the bar. And the most impressive part is that this wasn't classroom theory. It was used in real combat, dozens of times, often less than a kilometer from German lines. And there was at least one time when a positioning mistake nearly cost the entire unit their lives. I'll get to that. Let's understand how this actually worked on the ground. An inflatable tank wasn't just a giant balloon shaped like a tank. It had an internal frame. It was painted in the exact camouflage pattern of the real tanks from that specific division. It included fake but consistent serial numbers matching the rest of the unit, and the brilliant detail, soldiers would drive real vehicles around to leave fake tire tracks on the ground, so that if a reconnaissance plane photographed the area, it would look like dozens of heavy tanks had passed through. Because the enemy wasn't just looking at the object, he was looking at the context around it. A perfect tank sitting in an untouched field is suspicious. A poorly painted tank surrounded by mud tracks, fake exhaust smoke, and real soldiers walking around becomes believable. The sound part might be the most underrated even today. The sound unit, nicknamed the Ghost Company, had engineers who recorded months before operations began the real sound of armored columns moving during training in the United States. Those sounds were mixed like a movie soundtrack, several layers, engines at different distances, command voices, and played back through speakers mounted on half-tracks, which would take position at night, play the concert of fake movement, and vanish before dawn. German soldiers at listening posts reported on more than one occasion the movement of entire armored divisions that didn't exist. And then there's the radio part, which required an almost artistic kind of talent. Every telegraph operator has an accent in the way they tap out Morse code. Intelligence could sometimes identify exactly which soldier was operating a given radio just from the rhythm of the tapping. The Ghost Army's radio unit trained exhaustively to imitate the typing style of real operators from specific divisions, so that if German intelligence intercepted the signal, they believed they were hearing the same operator as always, only now, lying. All of this combined meant one thing. The Ghost Army could make the German High Command believe that an entire division of 15,000 to 20,000 men was positioned somewhere, when in reality, there were fewer than 200 American soldiers there, with rubber tanks and speakers. This worked on a small scale, in tests for months, but the operation that proved it could change the outcome of a real battle happened near the end of the war, crossing one of the most heavily watched rivers in Europe. And this time, the miscalculation nearly cost too much. March 1945, the Allies needed to cross the Rhine River, the last great natural barrier before the industrial heart of Germany. Whoever crossed first, and in the right spot, could speed up the end of the war by weeks. The problem? The Germans knew a crossing was coming. They just didn't know where.
The Allies' real plan was to cross near the city of Rheinberg. But if the Germans concentrated their best defensive units exactly there, the crossing could turn into a bloodbath. The solution? The Ghost Army was ordered to simulate, a few kilometers away, near Viersen, a massive crossing by two entire divisions, the 30th and the 79th Infantry, while those real divisions were actually positioned elsewhere, preparing for the actual attack. For 6 days, the Phantom unit worked practically without sleep. During the day, they drove real vehicles in and out of the area repeatedly to simulate a large volume of incoming troops. At night, they turned on the speakers, playing the sound of pontoons being assembled, engineers working, supply trucks coming and going. Fake insignia from both divisions showed up on vehicles, uniforms, and even on military traffic signs. Because yes, they even manufactured fake traffic signs to make it look like a real command post had been set up there. And here's the tensest moment of the entire operation. Part of the simulation required positioning the speakers very close to the riverbank, close enough that any German reconnaissance patrol, or worse, any German gunner firing blind, could hit the truck carrying the equipment and kill everyone inside. Unlike a real tank, a destroyed sound truck wouldn't leave behind a story of bravery. It would just leave the whole ruse collapsing along with the men.
During that specific operation, German artillery did in fact open fire toward the simulated position, believing they were shelling a real buildup of troops. The Ghost Army soldiers, without real heavy weapons to fire back the way a real division would, had to endure the bombardment in relative silence, keeping up the act, because firing back the wrong way, or not enough, would have instantly given away that this wasn't a real division. In the end, it worked. German attention stayed fixed on Viersen. The real crossing at Rheinberg met far less resistance than expected, and American troops crossed the Rhine with significantly fewer casualties compared to what Allied intelligence had projected if the German defense had been at full strength at that point. Historians from the American Army, decades later, would estimate that operations like this one, added up across the entire European campaign, spared between 15 and 30,000 American lives by repeatedly diverting German attention and resources to the wrong places. And even so, for more than 4 decades, nobody outside the army knew this had happened. Not even the soldiers' own families. Why? The answer has to do with a strategic decision that went far beyond the end of the Second World War. When the war ended in 1945, the American Army made a decision that seems excessive today, but made perfect sense at the time. Keep everything classified.
Why? Because the same techniques, sound deception, fake radio traffic, large-scale visual deception, weren't exclusive to the Second World War. They were tools that would remain very useful during the Cold War already taking shape on the horizon. Revealing exactly how the Ghost Army fooled the Germans would have handed the Soviet Union, on a silver platter, the manual for how to spot and defend against this kind of operation in the future. So the documents were locked away. The soldiers signed confidentiality agreements that barred them from sharing specific operational details even decades later. Many of them died without their own children ever knowing exactly what their father had done in the war, just that he worked in engineering or stayed in the rear. The material only began to be declassified more broadly in the 1990s and only gained real public attention after that, through documentaries, books, and, more recently, a Congressional Gold Medal awarded by the American Congress in 2022, almost 80 years after the war, and for most of the veterans, already posthumously. That means people like Bill Blass, who became one of the most respected names in American fashion, spent much of his life being asked about runway shows and collections, while almost no one knew that decades earlier, he had helped fool the German high command with rubber tanks.
The Ghost Army never had a great battle to be recorded in history books the way Stalingrad or D-Day do. There's no obvious movie scene, because their victory was, by definition,
to never be seen. Their work was only considered a complete success when no one, neither ally nor enemy, realized it had happened at all. And maybe that's exactly why this story is so powerful. It shows that in a war decided by steel, gunpowder, and millions of men, one of the United States' most effective weapons was a group of fewer than 1,100 artists, designers, and sound engineers, armed not with rifles, but with paint, speakers, and the ability to understand how the human mind builds reality out of fragments. They risked their lives without being able to fight back the way a real division would. They fooled one of the most well-organized armies in history, and they carried that secret in silence for almost half a century. If this story surprised you as much as it surprised me when I researched it, drop this below. Which other secret operation from the Second World War do you want me to cover next?